Hello, I will tell you about the Soviet Union. The Soviets were a political entity that existed in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, from 1922 until its collapse in 1991. The term Soviet comes from the Russian word for council, which refers to the system of government that was established after the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. The Soviets were made up of workers, peasants, and soldiers who elected representatives to local and national councils. These councils, in turn, elected officials to higher levels of government, culminating in the Supreme Soviet, the highest legislative body in the USSR. The Soviets were created as a way to give power to the working class and peasantry, who had been oppressed under the Tsarist regime. The Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, saw the Soviets as a means to establish a new socialist society in which the means of production would be owned by the people and production would be organized for the benefit of all. Under the Soviets, the government was organized into a series of bureaucratic structures, with the Communist Party at the top. The party was responsible for setting policy and overseeing the work of the government. The Soviets were responsible for carrying out policy at the local level and reporting back to higher levels of government. The Soviets established a planned economy in which the government controlled all major industries and resources. The goal was to eliminate the profit motive and create a system in which production was based on the needs of society rather than the interests of individual capitalists. The Soviets also established a system of universal education and healthcare, as well as extensive social welfare programs. Despite the lofty goals of the Soviets, the reality was often quite different. The planned economy proved to be inefficient and often resulted in shortages of basic goods. The government's control over industry and resources led to a lack of innovation and a reluctance to adopt new technologies. The bureaucracy was often corrupt and inefficient, and the Communist Party became increasingly disconnected from the people it was supposed to represent. The Soviets also had a dark side. The government was responsible for the deaths of millions of people through famine, purges, and forced labor camps. Dissent was not tolerated, and those who spoke out against the government were often arrested and sent to prison or labor camps. Despite these problems, the Soviets made significant achievements in science, technology, and culture. The space program, for example, was a major accomplishment, and Soviet literature, music, and art were celebrated around the world. The end of the Soviet Union in 1991 was a major turning point in world history. The collapse of the USSR marked the end of the Cold War, which had dominated international politics for over 4 decades. It also marked the end of the Soviet experiment in socialism, which had been a major force in world politics for much of the 20th century. In the years since the collapse of the USSR, there has been a great deal of debate about the legacy of the Soviets. Some see the Soviets as a failed experiment in socialism that resulted in the deaths of millions of people and set back the cause of socialism for decades. Others see the Soviets as a noble experiment in creating a more equal and just society, which made significant achievements despite its many flaws. Regardless of one's opinion of the Soviets, it is clear that they had a major impact on world history. The Soviet experiment in socialism inspired socialists and leftists around the world, and the collapse of the USSR marked the end of the bipolar world order that had dominated international politics for much of the 20th century. Today, the legacy of the Soviets remains an important topic of debate and discussion, as people around the world continue to grapple with questions about the best way to create a more just and equal society. If you liked the video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like the video. If there is a topic you want me to shoot, you can write it in the comments.